Welcome to the More Perfect Union, the podcast that offers real debate without the hate. Sponsored by BetterHelp.com. I'm Kevin Kelton in Los Angeles, and as always, I am joined by Mr. Greg Matusak.
Thank you, Kevin. I am hoping that we'll get more sponsorship by the company Venmo, because not only do we know that they're great for transferring money easily, but they're also great for catching child predators. Venmo, please sponsor us.
And also joined by Ward Anderson.
The Sandy Duncan of the More Perfect Union podcast.
Now, was Sandy Duncan the first host of
The Hogan Family? Okay.
The Hogan Family. Was she the first star or the second star?
She was the second star. Okay,
Valerie Harper.
Valerie Bertinelli got, not Valerie Bertinelli, Valerie Harper.
From Harper's Valley PTA,
Yes, of course. You know, she married Van Halen, and then she did this show. No, it was Valerie Harper, of course, had a show called Valerie, and it was a hit. After one season, she got into a negotiation dispute.
She thought she was irreplaceable. They replaced her.
She thought she was irreplaceable. They replaced her. The second season, the show was called Valerie's Family. She sued about them calling it Valerie's Family. And then from season 3, I guess until 5 or 6 when the show ended, it was called The Hogan Family. But it's that rare case of the show that managed to somehow go through all those changes and succeed. And Sandy Duncan was brought in as Valerie's sister once she had died.
Okay, so let's get serious for a moment. You know, when people like Robin Williams passed away, Prince passes away, great musicians, actors that we've grown fond of, you know, people on social media would get a little misty about it and talk about their experience maybe having taken a selfie with this person or having met this person.
Or what their music did for them, influenced them. Yeah, sure.
Right. But when we got to Prince Phillip, and I have to ask you, Ward, because I opened up Facebook that morning and I had my own jokes in mind that were probably too soon. All you wrote was Prince Phillip, rest in peace.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell whether you were serious or being ironic.
I mean, I was being serious. I mean, it was, you know, a man, a very, very famous man had died, and I posted rest in peace, and I meant it. The royals have always been an interesting thing to me because they've always kind of been a thing that's there to me, but they've never really moved me in one direction or another. But a lot of people really care one way or the other about them.
Right, it's a huge dichotomy. And if you watched the Netflix series The Crown, Prince Philip is a character who he's either your best friend, he's your favorite character, or you hate him. Right. So he's very polarizing. And especially in the past couple of years with the car accident that he was in, and they finally took away his license. And he was like 97, I think, when they took away his license.
Yep. Hold on. I just have to jump in here. They didn't take away his license. He voluntarily surrendered his license.
Same thing happened with me in fishing. So actually, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this other person that passed away, DMX. Now, we joke about me. I do barely know who this person is. I have been told that he's an incredibly significant rapper.
DMX is a groundbreaking. He was very popular in the 90s. He was definitely not first wave. I kind of also knew him as an actor in a lot of action flicks, Romeo Must Die or Cradle to the Grave.
Exit Wounds.
Oh yeah, Exit Wounds. And he had a great on-screen presence. In addition to seminal hits like Party Up Here, he actually had a Christmas tune also.
If you were into hip hop, DMX is a major influence on modern hip hop artists because, you know, when you look at hip hop, a lot of times you could look at it through the decades, right? And so if you look at hip hop in the 80s, a lot more sampling, a lot more electric, a lot more of the turntables, right? You get into the 90s, the drum sounds are different. You've got a lot more, and you'll hear this. If you think about the rap songs that were on the radio that you heard, hip hop songs that you heard in the 80s, Bell Biv DeVoe, MC Hammer, things like that, different drum sound, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So DMX was a pioneer in the fact that he was a guy that was able to combine hip hop and metal and techno. And, he had this variety of styles that he brought to hip hop and rapped over it. And that was what one of his big influences, what his big influence was to many up and coming artists, right? So he managed to take several different genres and techniques in the studio and blend them all together into a song. And that was one reason that he's going to be missed, because he's seen as a pioneer in that form of hip hop.
Okay. Good answer.
Or so I've heard.
Yeah. I mean, the influence that DMX had on modern hip hop and all modern music still has an effect on me today.
It's
and
true.
I think that's a little bit more the loss that we suffer, or we all feel.
Okay. So getting back to Prince Philip, it reminded me that the Queen is quite elderly and, only has a certain amount of time left. Knock wood, she should live to another 10, 15 years, but likely will not. Which led me to think today, is the world ready for a monarchy that is led by a king, King Charles? And again, I know so little and care so little about the royal family, but I know that there are people that do really follow this.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, it was charming in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. It was charming to have a queen who sort of represented royalty in our modern age because she was a woman. But now going back to having a king as a monarch in the Me Too era, is that going to go over?
So there are still many, many, many countries in this world that have male monarchs. No
doubt. Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Wakanda?
So this would Wakanda would be a great example. But and in fact, when I was a student in Luxembourg, for example, Luxembourg's such a tiny country. It's so awesome. The Salvation
not a real
Army
place. You're making that up.
It's like Wakanda. So they have a Grand Duke, they have a Grand Duchess, they have dukes, and they love that shit. We used to joke that the fastest way to get in a fight is go into any bar, and every bar has a picture of the Grand Duke, and you say, "Hey, why is a picture of Margaret Thatcher on the wall?" And the place would go apeshit. I mean, then you'd watch everyone just go crazy and start throwing shit. But the point being, yeah, we'll still have lots of. Will it make that much difference? No, I don't think so.
I see your point, and it's an interesting point, and I don't think you're far off base. But I think that the monarchy has also reached that point. I don't know how seriously it's taken anymore, right? And I discovered that this week with how many people were so mean about Prince Philip dying, right? So I think King Charles will just be met with we're still doing this? Okay. Because in a lot of ways, it does feel like that. I'm not belittling the fact that the monarchy means a lot to a lot of people, but it does seem like it's different than it was, say, when I was a kid.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see how it plays.
Yeah.
So another thing that was in the news this week, we spent a lot of time on that, reading a lot of articles about the transgender politics, trans athletes, and whether they should allow male to female transgender athletes to compete in women's sports is a big thing. And of course, whether people under the age of 18 should be allowed to get medical treatment, therapy to start their transition physically. Alabama apparently has passed some laws over the veto of the governor there. Greg, do you think that this is I think it's obviously the start of a bad trend, What do you think's going on?
Yeah, when the GOP is losing on economics, they're losing on infrastructure and all their other talking points, they like to go back to their social fears and they like to punch down. And in their version, they like to punch down to people who need the help the most. And this would be the transgender population. And it's, to say shitty, wait, no, that's too soft of a word. And the GOP and the Republicans are the ones who are enacting all these dumb laws. They're betraying all their core beliefs of, let's get out of people's lives. So they are literally saying, like, going against a doctor's order to their family. They're saying, look, we know better than your doctor. So if a family has decided that we think gene therapy or hormonal therapy or even surgery is what's in the best interest for this child, then we should go forward with it. They're saying, nope, a bunch of cis white guys who are probably over the age of 70, we know best. And that's messed up. So, and as far as the sports thing, in almost every state, transgender athletes are not allowed to compete unless they have to meet with a panel first, and they have to prove that them being transgender does not give them an athletic advantage.
I'm sorry, I got to stop you here just because that isn't a thing that happens. All right, part of the problem with this is we have now taken this trans athletes thing, and we've taken something that is a very, 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 very small percentage of the athletic community. Okay. And we've turned it into an issue, and we're having people talk about it like it's an issue. There are very, very few trans athletes in competitive sports, amateur or otherwise, in the world. All right. However, they have been there for decades. There have actually been trans athletes in competitive sports all over the world for decades. However, it is still, despite the fact that it's been going on forever, a small percentage of people. But when we talk about trans athletes, let's be honest. We all know what we're talking about. People are talking about men transitioning to women and trying to talk about how they are essentially men in dresses.
Right.
That's what people are trying to paint this as. They're trying to paint it as these are men calling themselves women, so they're bigger, they're stronger, faster, etc., because of the physical odds that a man is going to be bigger, faster, stronger. Okay. But what all these discussions fail to understand is that within a year of hormonal treatment and going through transition, within a year, a male to female trans person will have the same muscle mass as a female, the same muscle structure as a female, the same bodily composure as a female. It's not the muscle mass that's different from male to female. It's bone structure. Men tend to have denser, thicker bone structure, bigger arms, bigger, thicker hands, things like that. It isn't muscle mass. That's wrong. That's why you often see muscular women, cis hetero women, more muscular than cis hetero men. It isn't muscle mass where the size difference comes in with men and women. It's bone mass. Okay. And so what a lot of people have gone into is this whole, it's men in dresses essentially and everything like that. And although the bone structure may be larger, even in a post-op and post-hormonal therapy trans woman, the muscle mass isn't different. But I talk about all this just to tell all of you this. There has not been a single trans athlete in America to break any records or to be a champion at all. All this talk everyone has of these ringers that are going to come in and they're going to do all this, it's never happened, despite the fact there's already trans athletes playing. In fact, right. No team that has won a championship has a trans athlete playing on it. And you don't have a single trans athlete who has won a state, national, anything championship in America in any athletic, professional or otherwise. So we're making a really big deal, and I hate to say this, over a handful of people that other people have decided are dudes in dresses. And it's all just about anti-trans discrimination. It's about not understanding trans people and what it is.
It's transphobia and homophobia.
It's transphobia.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say.
Fear-mongering. It's fear-mongering.
Yeah. And it's the same thing that was going on in North Carolina when the whole bathroom issue came up. It was talking about men who were going to put on dresses so they could go into girls' bathrooms and, do something awful to
do something that's illegal, whether you got in there legally or not. It's still illegal. That's like saying, hey, I'm passed a law where it's totally legal to jaywalk. Cool. I guess this means I can deal coke in the middle of the street. No. No, it doesn't mean that at all.
The other thing we wanted to hit on is something that actually was in the news today, which is that Iran was hit by a nuclear quote-unquote accident, which nobody believes is an accident. Apparently, one of their nuclear sites had a blackout that threatened or possibly destroyed some of their centrifuges, and everyone suspects that Israel is behind this in a cyber attack, one of many that have happened over the last 4 or 5 years from Israel to Iran over the issue of their nuclear capability. My concern, and the reason I wanted to bring this up, is I'm starting to wonder whether Israel actually now may be the biggest danger to world peace. I know that's a very controversial sentence to say.
Wow.
I thought about that before I said it.
I'm not touching this one, man. You're
going to touch it. You're going to touch it. Because here's the deal. First of all, we're dealing with Iran. We had a nuclear deal. The Trump administration euphemistically blew it up. We're now trying to put back the pieces together so that we can contain their nuclear ambitions. But if Israel is going to consistently hit them with cyber attacks, at some point Iran is going to say, hey, this is warfare. You want to go that route? Let's go to war. And that will be the Middle East Armageddon that everybody is afraid of. So is Israel really furthering world peace through this series of cyber attacks that are both probably illegal and very destabilizing?
Yeah, I think the bigger question is, where do we see...
There's a bigger question than that?
Yeah, well, the more immediate question is, how is the Biden administration going to handle their response? Are we going to condemn Israel, which has been one of America's staunchest allies in that region, period? Or are we going to say, well, wasn't me, so I don't know. Are we going to continue with and try to build trust with Iran, who shouldn't trust anybody at this point?
Israel has lived under the umbrella of United States protection for a long time. We know that Israel has a very competent military. We know that Israel has a nuclear capability, but it's always been this is not the right word, but sort of a satellite of the United States. Certainly we have an alliance with them where we are a very strong ally and protector of Israel. But at some point, Israel is going to cowboy on these issues. And I think they're going to be put in a position where the United States may not be able to come to their defense as readily as we have in the past.
Oh, I don't think that will happen for quite a while. I mean, no. That's not going to happen for quite a while. No.
Okay.
I don't know. The whole thing just makes me, the way I am is I'm an American agnostic who is married to a Canadian Jewish woman. And I look at Israel a lot like I look at my wife. I love her very much, but if I criticize her around other people, I have to be really, really careful because they really love her and don't trust me.
Okay.
But you really touch on it, Kevin. It's Israel is probably the most notable overseas ally of the United States after Great Britain maybe or whatever, as you get into the Middle East or whatever. So it's like you just said, right? It's a very difficult thing. And look at how we reacted when you said, I'm going to talk about Israel, and Greg and I both went, oh boy,
I think that's part of the problem. That it's become politically incorrect to say anything that sounds like it's in any way not supportive of Israel. It's like, we have the Me Too movement and we have the Israel Too movement.
Well,
and, but I'm telling you, politically, they're walking out on a ledge here. They're walking out on a tree limb by continuing to hit, other countries with cyber attacks that can be taken as an act of war.
At the same time, I have to jump in just with defense of Israel in the fact that we are still talking about, in that area, the most hated nation, that so many nations in that area would like to wipe off the planet, and isn't that where all this comes, what it all comes down to? So much of what this comes down to is that Israel is a nation surrounded by countries that want to wipe it off the planet.
The issue is cyber warfare. Is cyber warfare just, pranks and funny little black ops that nations do to each other, and everybody does it and it's an unspoken secret? So what's the big deal? We set back their nuclear program another 6 months. What's the big deal? We maybe saved everybody because nobody wants Iran to be a nuclear power. Or are these legitimate acts of war that one day some country is going to turn around and say, screw you, if you do that again, you're going to be seeing missiles flying over, Jerusalem. And then what do you do?
There you have it.
And then what do you do? So, anyways.
What do you think, listeners? Kevin, don't we have an email address where they can send us their thoughts and opinions?
No, we don't care what they think.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Actually, you can. I was joking. You can write to us at mpupodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear from our listeners. We got some very good feedback this week. We asked last week of what we could do to reinvigorate the show. We got some very nice responses. And so this week, if you want to weigh in on any of our issues, mpupodcast@gmail.com. And with that, well, we want to say hello again to our sponsor, BetterHelp.com. They've been our sponsor all during 2021, and we're appreciative of that. And we want to point out to you, the listeners, why they're our beloved sponsor. They are the online therapy website that can help you identify what's holding you back in your life and then maybe help you begin to achieve your goals. Ward Anderson, you've talked on the show about using BetterHelp. Obviously, we know you're a testimonial, but what are some of the attributes of it that you find charming?
Well, I mean, it's not a crapshoot, right? BetterHelp will match you with your own licensed professional therapist. It's not just a roll of the dice. They're going to help you to connect in a safe, private, online environment, which is convenient. I've said it on this show before. I don't actually like to go out and meet with my therapist when I talk. I like doing it from the comfort of my own home, and you have that option now, right? And you can start communicating with your therapist in under 24 hours. I mean, Greg, you know that. I've had to wait longer up here to get my tire changed.
That's the whole socialism thing up in Canada. I
exactly.
think. Exactly. It deals with oil changes too up there. Plus, as Snoop Dogg once said, I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind, because it does. Thank you. This
is the whitest hip hop episode of this show
that
we've ever had. From DMX to a commercial with Snoop Dogg. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Really bad Snoop Dogg references, because it comes down to money sometimes. And BetterHelp is affordable. It's much more affordable than traditional counseling. And financial aid is available. And wait, there's more. There's a broad range of experts available in different therapies and areas and modalities. That's not French. Experts who may not be available locally. And wait, did I say there was more? There is more. As a More Perfect Union listener, you'll get 10% off your first visit by visiting our sponsor at betterhelp.com/moreperfect. That's our promo code.
And you know what? Just like MC Hammer said, you can't touch this. You can't touch this incredible deal of betterhelp.com. So do like do like Young MC said and bust a move right to your computer right away. And just as Tone Loc said, be a wild thing and go to that one. Oh shit. And just as Tone Loc said, be a wild thing and get your funky cold Medina ass on and go to betterhelp.com.
And as Kevin MX said, join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/moreperfectunion to get your 10% off and start your road to recovery today.
That's right, fans.
Okay.
Don't forget.
That's right.
Walk this way, as Run DMZ said, all the way to betterhelp.com.
So I was thinking about some weird, stuff this week, and I'm thinking about, okay, we had January 6th. We have now the Biden administration following the Trump administration. Everybody's worried about insurrection. Everybody's worried about these cults of violence that are percolating across the country. And what could come next? Where could this be going? And I thought, what we need to do is shine a light on these militia groups so that, one, they're not so mysterious, and two, give them an outlet so that they're not just building up hostility that they need to work out by trying to overthrow the government. And it occurred to me, what is the best place to give people an outlet? It's with their own TV series. So here's my pitch. A game show about militias where each week two militia movements, real militia movements, compete against each other in paintball to achieve a mission. So, like maybe every week we would have a different celebrity governor. We could start with Andrew Cuomo, and he's sitting in the middle of this field or some safe house, and the two militia teams have to compete paintball style with referees out there to call the kills and the no kills to see who can get to the governor first. All I need is a title.
This has Jesse Ventura as host.
Oh, I love it.
Written all over it. And it's we've got two groups here competing against who gets to rule the world after the apocalypse. Who's going to take down the governor and rule the new America? And you really make it like a fight to the death kind of thing, and you make it a cross between Wipeout and Survivor. This is a hit, goddammit.
I was thinking more like an Oliver North, but I think your way might be more commercial, actually.
I was thinking some sort of like McClure like round table where they would all like present their ideas, like, I believe that government is for the people and not against the people, and then they would then talk about their ideas rationally, blah, blah, blah. And then, any incongruencies that we could then point out. But, I guess everyone's ideas have their own merits, I'm sure.
No. Fuck that. Whoever wins gets to go head-to-head with Jimmy Superfly Snuka in a battle to marry Sarah Palin. Whoever wins, the head of that militia gets to take Sarah Palin as his bride.
Sarah Palin as the host, I like.
That's no. She's the prize, Kevin. That is the prize for season 1. Sarah Palin's hand in marriage. We combine the Bachelorette,
but she's already married.
We'll shoot it in Utah, Kevin. We combine. Look at what we're doing here. We combine Sister Wives with Survivor, with Mountain Men, with Wipeout. This is a fucking hit.
And then, once that TV show goes on the air, and by the way, folks, copyright Kelton Media 2021.
The animated opening sequence is going to be by me. It's going to look just like Bewitched with Dick York. Not Dick Sargent.
But then we have the issue of rights and royalties. Correct, Ward Anderson?
Rights and royalties. Now, I do want to ask you this really quick, Kevin. You have been a television writer for many years, and do you still get, as a writer, as a staff writer, you wrote for Boy Meets World and A Different World, Night Court, SNL,
and a slew of others.
A slew of others. I'm naming the multi-season or more popular or more known, whatever. But I mean, you worked on many shows. Do sitcom writers get royalties?
We get residuals.
Residuals. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm saying royalties. It's kind of all the same thing. Royalties, residuals. Musicians say royalties. TV, film people, actors, writers, we tend to say residuals. Okay.
Right. Same premise. Yeah, I still get them. I came up with a story for a Jeffersons episode in 1982, a Christmas episode. Mm-hmm. I still get annual checks. They're not a lot, but yeah.
What's the smallest check you've gotten?
The small, I've gotten checks that were less than 10 cents.
Sure.
Really?
Yeah, maybe 3 cents might be my lowest.
What are the most lucrative?
Oh, well, the first time it reruns, you get 100% of what you earned the first time, I think.
Yeah.
And then the second time, it's like 50%. Now, people will probably think, this is BS. Why do these people get free money or something? What happened was when they started to construct what we now call the TV season, they actually cut the calendar in half. They said, you know what? People during the summers, they're out going to the beach. There's nice weather outside, so they don't watch as much TV. So we can't afford to create 52 weeks of new programming every year. What we'll do is we'll do 22 or 24 or 26 weeks of new programming, and then we'll rerun the old stuff because it doesn't cost us anything to rerun it. And then even though we'll have lower ratings, we'll be making money because we're essentially taking a product that we already sold once and selling it again. And we'll charge
less for the commercials in the summertime than we do in the winter, the fall, the Super Bowl, whatever.
Right, but still making massive, massive money.
Yes.
And the Writers Guild and then the Actors Guild and the Directors Guild said, hey, wait a second, that's all well and good for you, Mr. Network Television person, but our people need to make a living, and they can't live on half a year's salary. And so the guilds negotiated this idea that if you're going to reuse somebody's work product, you've got to pay them for that. Just like if Taylor Swift, who we may talk about later, releases a new album, you play her song on your radio show, you got to give her a little taste, okay? And that's what residuals are. So it's not that we're getting extra money. It's that we essentially get paid for 2 or 3 runs, but we don't get paid all of that up front.
Well, the easiest way to say it is that the product is still being sold and making money. And so therefore the people involved in making the product continue to get paid for it. And royalties somehow confuse a lot of people, but that's essentially what it is. When you think of residuals for TV people, and film people, it's that as long as the product is making money, the people involved in making the product continue to make money, right? So like Kevin was talking about, there's some people that make, 10 cents, and I'm the same way. I get the average 10-cent check or $1 check. However, as a performing artist, because I have a record label with my comedy albums and a video label for my comedy special or whatever, residuals from me, I don't know how it is for you now at this point, Kevin, where you're semi-retired or whatever, but my residuals are still a good 20% of my income every year, maybe 25, maybe a quarter.
Maybe not that high, but maybe 10. Well, let me think. Maybe 5% of my income.
Yeah. But this is the thing that's been changing over the years, especially with streaming when it comes to not just musical artists, but that includes TV people as well. For those of you that don't know, the cast of Friends, for instance, the cast of Friends still get, on average, a piece, almost $100 million a year in residuals, because Friends is still the number one syndicated television program in the world, right? So there is a lot of money to be made in that. And there's also not a lot of money to be made in that. Okay. Now, going to music, the reason I'm bringing this up is because this week, Taylor Swift hit the charts with her new album, Fearless. Greg, do you know all about the new album, Fearless?
Is this the remake of her early album?
There you have it.
Her first album?
Fearless is actually a re-recording of an album that Taylor Swift put out in 2008. She released this week Fearless, the 2021 edition, with 6 new songs at the end. But it is a re-recording of that album. A lot of people don't know why she was doing this. What has been the reason for doing this? Well, I'll tell you. The reason for doing this has to do with the fact that a lot of times musicians, and I shouldn't even say a lot of time, most of the time, musicians wind up, in order to break out and become huge and famous, they sign really bad deals. Most deals for new recording artists are bad. So when people say, I can't believe they signed a bad deal, almost everyone signs a bad deal. Well, Taylor Swift does not actually own the rights to her original album, Fearless. As the songwriter and as the performer, she gets different royalties for those, but she doesn't actually own those songs. The original recordings, the most famous album, those are owned by people she's been in dispute with over those rights for years. And this is what commonly happens with artists, is that they get a bad deal and, you know, they have these hit songs that they don't actually make the most money from. The label and whoever ends up buying or holding on to those rights to that song, they have that. And that's why Taylor Swift decided to go back and re-record her songs. She's got such a huge fan base that it looks like her album that was a big number one album in 2008 looks like, it hasn't been reported yet, looks like it's going to be number one again now with a totally re-recorded version. But this is a big deal, guys. And the reason I say this is because, did you guys know that re-recordings have been happening for 40 years anyway? 50 years?
Yeah. Yeah, I did know that, actually. So, like, for example, there was an Adam Sandler movie called Big Daddy, with and most of the soundtrack was Styx. Mm-hmm. And so when he approached the members of Styx, because he's Adam Sandler, he said, hey, I want to use your songs. And they said, wait a second, why don't we just re-record them for you real quick rather than you go into the record label, because we don't own those songs anymore. So they re-recorded all the songs he wanted, made a shit ton more money themselves. And that's a great example of exactly what you're talking about. And you'll see that on a lot of soundtracks, where you'll see the band, it's a different recording because the band will say,
by the original artist, by the original person.
By the original artist, and it will sound almost exactly the same. But the artist will get the money from that recording.
Now what's happened is the services from Spotify to Pandora to Apple Music, iTunes, everything, have started to indicate that it's a re-recorded version of the song. Yes. But this is something that has been going on for years without people even realizing that sometimes they were hearing a re-recorded version of a song. But who do we have to thank for really starting this off and figuring out it was a way for the artist to make more money after becoming famous and leaving a label that gave them a bad deal? Does anyone know?
Prince Phillip.
Frank Sinatra.
Oh, I was close.
Frank Sinatra, upon leaving, I believe it was Columbia, started his own record label called Reprise. And one of the first things he did was re-record all of his big hits on brand new albums. And of course, it's a different time. Right? You bought the album that came out. We didn't have everything available digitally. So if there was an old Sinatra album, you couldn't just go to your phone and find it. If it wasn't in the store, you weren't going to get it. So Sinatra recording all of his old hits on brand new albums made people buy the brand new albums. And Sinatra knew that every time he did that, he'd make more money because now it went to his new label, which he owned. as opposed to the old.
So instead of him getting 20%, he was getting 70 or 80%
Yes.
of the revenue.
So I tell people, look around, and you'll see this a lot. You'll see it a great bit. If you go to iTunes or if you have Spotify, you'll notice a lot of the songs playing are re-recorded versions. It actually says that. And I tell people, buy those if you can, because if you really care about the artist. If you don't give a shit, then don't do it. But if you really care about the artist, buy those. That goes to the artist, not to some label. And a little tidbit you may not realize. When an artist re-records a version, if a song, a popular song from the 60s is used in a commercial, let's say, the artist may get nothing for that. And then whoever used that commercial may have paid as little as $5 to $10,000 for it, despite it being a famous song. But if it's a re-recorded version, the full $5 to $10,000 will go to the artist for the re-recorded version.
If they choose to use the re-recorded.
If they choose to use that. But that's part of what's been going on, this new thing. And Taylor Swift, her success is making artists rethink this, because it isn't actually from re-releasing your songs for the public that you make your most money. It's in the licensing. And if you make it to where they cannot license anything but the re-recorded version, that's where the money is. If it's played on the radio, the artist gets a little bit. If it's played in a TV show or a commercial, it's 7 figures. And if it's played in a movie trailer, it can be 8 figures. That's how big a deal the music royalty industry is. So you don't even realize that a lot of the reasons that you see all these re-recorded versions, it's the artist trying to license their music, actually not even to you, the consumer. They're trying to get that version out there for the TV, film, commercial, and TV trailer rights.
And to roll this back, or to come full circle, since we started, you asked me about television shows.
Yeah.
I would imagine you guys both know this. Desi Arnaz, who was married to Lucille Ball, was a brilliant businessman, even though, you think of his character, Ricky Ricardo, as this Latin band leader and the foil to Lucy in I Love Lucy. He was a brilliant businessman, and he realized in the early 1950s that since they were going to be rerunning these shows, it was better if he owned the kinescopes than if he just let the network produce them. So he created his own production company, which was called Desilu Productions. And they filmed their own I Love Lucy half hours. They owned those kinescopes, and they made a fortune off of them, which they would not have made had they done it the way it was being done before then.
Well, this whole thing about copyrights and who owns the rights to a song or a show, a lot of people don't realize some of the most famous things we talk about in pop culture are because of that. Prince changed his name to a symbol, because of a copyright thing. He didn't actually own the rights to the name Prince. That was owned by his record label. That was all part of a record label dispute, him changing his name like that. It was his way of producing music his own way without having to deal with the fact that his name, Prince, was owned by a label. And just like you were talking about Lucy and Desi and all that, people have to, for those that don't get this, when I talk about music and song royalties and everything like that, just to give you just an idea of it, think about this. Wonderful Christmas Time by Paul McCartney. It's one of the most hated Christmas songs of all time. But I have a feeling most of you know it. And it's that simply having a wonderful Christmas time. That's a song by Paul McCartney that he did in 20 minutes with a synthesizer in a home studio by himself. That song makes Paul McCartney over $400,000 per year in royalties alone. One of his least liked songs. That's how much money there is in songwriting and publishing and recording and all that. So that's why you're going to see more and more now that it's so easy to make digital re-recordings and have them sound pretty close to the original, that's where you're going to see more and more of that. It's the artist going back for the money that they didn't get the first time around.
There you go. Greg, you're a music guy. Any thoughts on this?
Oh, I think it's great that when artists get paid. I understand it's a business. I do understand that record companies do have to get paid. There is a lot to that. I think that some of the deals, I don't like it when artists don't keep control of their songs.
And most don't, by the way. It's not like
right.
We've painted the record labels as evil, and maybe that's
but they're
true.
Not.
But it's, I mean, whether or not that's true, this has been the practice for 50, 60 years. You know,
right? But we do have to remember: one, record labels are businesses. They are out there to make money. Two, for every Taylor Swift out there, there's like 10,000 bands that get a record label that get paid, and only 5 albums get sold. And the record label eats it. So, you know, there is all that to think about also. And it's a business. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't. And I don't feel bad because they made a bad business decision, but they're investing in art and artists, and that can be tricky.
Well, there's also the argument to be made that they aren't making a bad business decision, because without the record label, some of these bands that sign these bad deals that we talk about are legendary bands that we never would have found had it not been for these major labels putting their support behind them. So it is hard
just like Taylor Swift.
Exactly. And it's hard to paint a villain in this. I mean, we love to paint the corporation, the record label, as the villain. But the truth is, there's so many of these bands that we only know about them because they signed with the major label.
Yeah, it's one of my gripes. I'm sorry, Kevin, but it's one of my gripes that every time you see a rock bio movie, whether the Queen movie that was just this past year, the Freddie Mercury one, or the Elton John, or any movie,
Straight Outta Compton,
everything, the record company is always just these terrible people. And halfway through, I'm thinking, no, these are the guys who want you to be successful so they can be successful. And I know you're difficult to work with, but at no point are they saying, oh, we don't want you to make a hit. We don't want, never.
The only thing that ever bugs me about any of those movies and stuff is that, you know, I have a TV comedy special that was released, and it was released also as an audio album or whatever. And the label that signed me, that distributed the TV special and the audio version or whatever, they were pretty upfront with me that I wasn't going to see any money. Like, they were like, look, this thing's going to be distributed all over the world. It's going to be available in more places than you'd ever have it available in if you did this without us. This thing's going to be everywhere that you can find it. It's going to be findable and all of that. You probably won't see any money from this for years, if at all, but you'll be more visible than you'd ever be if you did this without us. And they made that clear. So it's, I don't know, maybe it's just kind of maybe it's an after the fact kind of thing, because, you know, our generation, you and me, Greg, we're the same age. Like, maybe we just grew up knowing that this was how the labels and everybody did things. But I'm the same way. I'm like you are when I see all these biopics where I go, how did you have nobody that told you that this was what the contract said? Like, how did nobody tell you that this is where this was going? Because, you know, I'm not sitting pretty or anything like that, but I had, you know, half-assed people that lived next door going, yeah, this contract isn't really that good, dude, but, you know, what else are you going to do? And I was like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
Good point.
You know, you mentioned that the production companies, the record companies, aren't the villains in this. You know who I think the villain is in this whole thing?
Who's that?
Israel.
Oh,
I really think.
Boo. I'm going to say Matt Gaetz. And I am therefore the most likable person on the show this week.
But not the good people at Venmo, because we want them to be sponsors.
Right. And with that, we want to thank everybody for listening. Please Venmo us as much money as you can to mpupodcast@gmail.com.
The views about Israel expressed by Kevin Kelton are not shared by the other hosts of the More Perfect Union podcast or its affiliates.
And yet you will still be hunted down and killed. If you enjoy what we do here, please follow us on Twitter at MPU Podcast and on Instagram at MPU Fan Club. And don't forget to share our link on your Facebook timeline so your friends can discover us as well.
Okay, so I'm going to stop my...
No, don't stop anything. I don't have an ending.
Oh, okay, ready? Do your ending. Do your ending.
I don't have one.
And I'm Kevin Kelton, and that's been another great week here of the More Perfect Union podcast. Now, excuse me while I go spend some time with my ballerina wife. I love my golden years.
It's uncanny. You sound just like me.
It's like looking into a mirror. I mean, like
it's
two
like
mirrors.
looking into it.
It's like playing his voice message. It's like playing his voicemail.
Okay, I can end on that.